Hello, and welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. Before we begin tonight's tale, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below so you never miss any of our bedtime stories. Now, let's dive into a story that began in the heart of California, but carries a thread many of us in the UK can connect to. Because sometimes, a small mishap can turn into an unforgettable memory. It was the summer of 2019, late August to be precise, when Emily Turner, a 28-year-old schoolteacher from Manchester, finally stepped foot inside Disneyland, California. She had saved for years, always dreaming of walking down Main Street, USA, with the castle glowing in the distance like something pulled out of her childhood imagination. The morning air was already warm, the sky an unbroken sheet of blue above Anaheim. Families bustled around her, children wearing Mickey ears, parents juggling maps and snack bags, while cast members in crisp uniforms guided the crowd with bright smiles. Emily clutched her small crossbody bag close to her, her heart racing, not from nerves, but from pure excitement. She had a list of rides she wanted to try, from Space Mountain to Pirates of the Caribbean, and she couldn't wait to start. Around 11:30 a.m., after her third ride of the day, she stopped by Jolly Holiday Bakery Cafe to grab an iced coffee. She found a shaded bench beneath a row of fluttering American flags and sat down, pulling out her phone to send photos back to her younger sister in London. She didn't realize it then, but as she shifted her bag to the side and reached for her drink, her wallet slipped out, falling silently onto the ground, half hidden beneath the bench's shadow. It wasn't until nearly an hour later, standing in line for Haunted Mansion, that she felt the sudden jolt of panic. She reached into her bag to grab some cash for a churro, and her hand met nothing but empty lining. Her wallet was gone. Inside it were her ID debit card, a small amount of cash, and most painfully, a photograph of her late father she always carried with her. Her chest tightened. The cheerful chatter around her suddenly sounded distant, muffled, as though the world had pulled away. She stepped out of the queue, her eyes scanning frantically over the crowd. How could she possibly find it in this sea of people? She retraced her steps, weaving through Main Street, her pulse quickening with every minute. The sun was higher now, the heat pressing down, and Emily felt a knot form in her throat. In a place filled with magic, she was suddenly gripped by dread. By 1 p.m., she had circled back to the bench where she had first sat with her coffee. Her breath caught. There was no wallet in sight, just a group of children laughing, their balloon strings tugging in the breeze. She bit her lip, fighting back the sting of tears. But just as she was about to give up and head to the lost and found office, a voice cut through the noise. "Excuse me, miss. Are you looking for this?" Emily turned. A tall young man, maybe in his early 30s, with sandy hair and a Disneyland staff badge that read Daniel, stood there holding something small and familiar. Her wallet. Her heart leapt. Relief washed over her so quickly it nearly made her dizzy. She hurried over, clutching it as though it were a lifeline. Yes, that's mine. Thank you so much," she stammered, her voice shaking with gratitude. Daniel smiled warmly, the kind of genuine smile that cut through her anxiety. "A guest turned it in this morning. I thought I recognized the description when I saw you circling back here. You're lucky. It was still exactly where you dropped it." Emily's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Everything was there. The cash, the cards, and even the worn photograph of her father. She closed it gently, pressing it to her chest, overwhelmed by a sudden mixture of relief and emotion. The noise of Disneyland returned around her. The music, the laughter, the whirl of rides. But it all felt different now, sharper, more alive. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Emily's fingers lingered on the smooth leather of her wallet, as though it were a fragile treasure she had almost lost forever. The relief was so intense that she needed a moment just to steady her breathing. She looked at Daniel, who was still standing there, his badge catching the sunlight that filtered through the leaves above. He seemed patient, as though he had seen this kind of panic before, but there was also something in his expression, a quiet understanding that felt deeply personal. "Really, I can't thank you enough," Emily said, her voice trembling between gratitude and exhaustion. "If I'd lost this well, I don't know what I would have done." Daniel gave a small nod, his sandy hair shifting slightly in the breeze. "We get quite a few lost items every day. Wallets, phones, even engagement rings. Most of them make their way back to the owner. But I could tell this one meant more than just the money inside." Emily blinked at him, surprised by how perceptive he was. She hesitated, then whispered, "There's a photo in here. My dad. He passed away last year. I carry it everywhere." For a second, Daniel's smile softened into something gentler. "I lost my mum a few years ago," he said quietly, almost as though sharing a secret. "I carry a little locket she gave me, even on shift. So, I get it. Some things you just can't replace." Their eyes met briefly, and in that crowded, bustling place filled with children's laughter and the distant whistle of the Disneyland Railroad, Emily felt an unexpected sense of connection to this stranger. The moment might have lasted longer, but a group of visitors approached Daniel, asking for directions to Adventureland. He excused himself politely, helped them with cheerful precision, and then turned back to her. "You'll be okay now?" he asked. "Yes, I think so," Emily said, tucking her wallet carefully back into her bag and zipping it shut this time. "Good. Just remember, Lost and Found is on Main Street if you ever need it again. And keep your bag close on the rides. Some of them are wilder than they look." He gave her a friendly nod before stepping away, melting back into the sea of uniforms and visitors. Emily stood there for a moment, clutching her bag tightly, her heart still racing from the scare, but also warmed by his kindness. She decided to take a break before diving into more rides. Finding an ice cream stand, she bought a small sundae and sat on a shaded bench near Sleeping Beauty's castle. The spires glittered under the noon sun, and every so often a breeze carried the faint melody of parade rehearsals from down the street. She watched families pass by, overheard children squealing about seeing Mickey, and thought about how close she had come to ruining her day. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her sister back in London. "How's Disneyland? Tell me everything. Send photos." Emily smiled weakly and snapped a few pictures of the castle, the carousel turning just beyond it, and her half-eaten sundae. But she didn't mention the lost wallet. Not yet. She didn't want to worry her sister or overshadow the magic of being here. By mid-afternoon, she found herself wandering toward Frontierland. The riverboats drifted lazily across the water, and the air was filled with the faint scent of popcorn and churros. She queued for Big Thunder Mountain, this time double-checking her bag every few minutes, unwilling to repeat her earlier mistake. The ride left her breathless and laughing, her hair wild in the desert wind of the attraction. But still she couldn't shake the lingering thought of Daniel's words. There was something about the way he had spoken, calm, grounded, as though he had seen 1,000 small crises and still believed in kindness each time. It wasn't just his job. It was how he carried himself. At around 4 p.m., after hours of rides and a quick meal at Rancho del Zocalo, Emily's legs began to ache. She wandered into a quieter corner of the park, near the wishing well tucked behind the castle. There, away from the crowds, the sound of trickling water mingled with faint birdsong, and the world felt a little slower. She dropped a coin into the well, whispering a wish she hadn't planned to say aloud. "I wish today turns into something more than just a scare." As if on cue, a voice called out from behind her. "Making wishes?" Emily turned. Daniel again, though this time he wasn't guiding guests. His shift badge was still pinned on, but he held a paper cup of coffee in his hand, clearly on a break. She laughed softly, a little embarrassed. "Maybe. Old habits die hard. Nothing wrong with wishing," he said, taking a seat on the stone wall near her. "Half the magic of this place is believing they might come true." They spoke for a while, at first lightly, about the park, about the ride she had tried, about how overwhelming it could be for first-timers. But soon, the conversation drifted deeper, slipping into stories of travel, family, and the odd feeling of being so far from home, yet finding comfort in strangers. Emily found herself telling him about Manchester, about her students who had begged her to bring back Mickey Mouse souvenirs, and about her father, whose love of Disney films had shaped her childhood. Daniel listened intently, never rushing her, sipping his coffee and nodding in quiet understanding. In turn, he shared pieces of his life. Growing up in California, working summers at the park since university, and how he had never quite managed to leave because, despite the chaos, there was something about Disneyland that kept pulling him back. The golden light of late afternoon stretched across the castle spires as they talked, and Emily realized she hadn't checked her watch in nearly an hour. She felt strangely weightless. The earlier panic of the lost wallet, now a distant memory, replaced by the warmth of unexpected companionship. When the announcement came over the speakers about the upcoming evening parade, Daniel stood and brushed a few crumbs from his trousers. "I should get back, but if you don't have plans, you should watch the parade from near the fire station on Main Street. Best view in my opinion." Emily smiled. "I'll take your expert advice." He gave a quick wave before heading off, disappearing once more into the flow of guests. She watched him go, her chest carrying a warmth that surprised her. As twilight fell, the park transformed. Strings of lights twinkled to life. The castle shimmered in hues of pink and blue, and the air was alive with anticipation. Emily found her spot near the fire station just as the parade began. The floats glided past with glowing lanterns, music swelling, characters waving from their thrones of light. She laughed and clapped with the crowd, her earlier fears now nothing but a faint shadow in the background of a day that had turned into something extraordinary. And yet, as the last float passed and the crowd began to disperse, she couldn't help glancing around, wondering if she might see Daniel again. It was foolish, perhaps, but the thought lingered all the same. Night settled over Disneyland, the fireworks show about to begin. Emily tilted her face to the sky, ready for the first spark to burst into the darkness, unaware that her day still held another turn she hadn't expected. The night air at Disneyland carried a different kind of energy. The heat of the day had softened, replaced by a gentle breeze that rustled through the trees lining Main Street. Families gathered close together, children sitting on shoulders, couples holding hands, and groups of friends settling on the pavement with popcorn buckets between them. The atmosphere was charged with expectation, The kind that made even adults feel like children again. Emily found a spot on the curb not far from the fire station, just as Daniel had suggested. She hugged her small souvenir bag against her knees. Her wallet now safely tucked inside her crossbody bag, zipped and double-checked. She still hadn't fully shaken the earlier panic, but the day had shifted so dramatically since then that the fear had transformed into a story she might one day laugh about. The lights dimmed, and a hush swept across the crowd. Then, with a sudden burst, the first fireworks streaked upward and exploded into brilliant golden light. The castle bathed in shimmering hues, the sky alive with cascading stars. Gasps and cheers rose around her, echoing like waves. Emily tilted her head back, mesmerized. As the show continued, her mind drifted. She thought of her father again, remembering the way he used to hum Disney tunes while washing the car on Sunday mornings, or how he had once saved up to take her and her sister to Disneyland Paris. She wondered what he would have thought if he could see her here now, sitting alone among strangers, yet feeling more connected than she had in months. Her eyes wandered through the crowd, almost without meaning to, searching for a familiar figure. It was foolish, she told herself. Daniel was working. He probably wasn't anywhere near this part of the park. Yet some part of her hoped anyway. Halfway through the show, a shadow shifted nearby. She glanced to her right, and there he was, Daniel, off duty now, without the crisp uniform, but in a plain gray hoodie and jeans. He stood just a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the sky. She hesitated, wondering whether to call out. But then, as if sensing her stare, he turned. His eyes met hers, surprise flickering across his face before melting into a smile. He moved through the crowd and settled beside her on the curb, the fireworks painting shifting colors across his features. "Thought you might actually take my advice," he said lightly. Emily laughed, though her voice was hushed, as though speaking too loudly might break the magic of the moment. "It was good advice. This really is the perfect spot." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky bloom with reds, blues, and silvers. The music swelled, a medley of songs from films Emily had grown up with. When the theme from The Lion King began, she felt her throat tighten. Daniel must have noticed, because he leaned closer and whispered, "That one always gets me too." By the time the finale erupted, a dazzling shower of gold falling like rain against the dark, the two of them were sitting shoulder to shoulder, caught in the shared wonder of the spectacle. When the last firework faded and the crowd erupted in applause, Emily realized she had been holding her breath. As people began to disperse, Daniel stretched his arms. "You hungry? There's a place just outside the park that serves decent food, and it's a lot quieter than the restaurants inside. You don't have to, of course, but you've had quite a day." Emily hesitated only briefly. Something about the warmth in his voice made it easy to trust him. "That sounds nice," she admitted. "I could use something that isn't popcorn or churros." They left the park together, the flow of guests carrying them toward the exit gates. The night outside was cooler, the streets lit with neon signs and the distant hum of traffic. Daniel led her to a small diner a short walk away, tucked on a corner with red booths and the comforting smell of frying onions and fresh coffee. They slid into a booth, and for the first time all day, Emily felt herself exhale fully. The noise of the park had been exhilarating, but here, in the soft glow of the diner, she felt grounded. They ordered burgers and milkshakes, and as they waited, The conversation picked up where it had left off earlier by the wishing well. Emily shared stories of her classroom back in Manchester. How one boy had a habit of doodling superheroes on every assignment. How another had cried with joy when he learned he'd passed his exams. Her eyes sparkled as she spoke, and Daniel listened, chin resting on his hand, a faint smile playing on his lips. In turn, he told her about working at Disneyland, the long hours, the summer heat, but also the moments that made it worthwhile. Like the time he reunited a lost child with his frantic parents, or when an elderly couple thanked him for taking a photo that later became their Christmas card. It's not always easy, he admitted. But when you see someone's face light up, it feels like you're part of something bigger, like you're helping keep the magic alive. Emily sipped her milkshake thoughtfully. That's rare, to find someone who really believes in what they're doing. Maybe, Daniel said, shrugging modestly, or maybe I just never grew up. They both laughed. The kind of laugh that comes easily when two people discover a rhythm between them. By the time they finished eating, the clock above the counter showed nearly midnight. Emily felt the heaviness of the day settling into her bones. A pleasant exhaustion that came from walking, laughing, panicking, and then finding unexpected comfort. Daniel insisted on walking her back to her hotel, a modest place just a few blocks away. The streets were quiet now, the neon glow reflecting off the pavement. When they reached the entrance, Emily turned to him, suddenly unsure how to put into words the gratitude she felt. "Thank you," she said softly, "not just for finding my wallet, but for tonight, for making this day end differently than it began." Daniel smiled, his hands shoved in his hoodie pockets. "I'm glad you didn't let it ruin your trip. You deserve better than that." For a moment, they stood there in the stillness of the night, the hum of a vending machine the only sound nearby. Emily felt something stir in her chest, a mix of nerves and anticipation, the sense that this day had been about more than just a lost wallet. "Maybe we could meet again," she said, her voice hesitant but hopeful. "I've got a few more days here before I fly back to the UK." His smile widened. "I'd like that." They exchanged numbers, a simple act that carried a weight of possibility. And as Emily finally retreated into her hotel, the sound of the door clicking shut behind her, she leaned against the wall of her room with a smile she hadn't worn in a long time. Outside, the lights of Disneyland still glowed faintly in the distance, a reminder of the day's chaos and its quiet miracles. And somewhere in the middle of it all, between panic and relief, between strangers and something more, Emily realized she was carrying a story she would never forget. The morning sun crept gently into Emily's hotel room, slipping through the thin curtains and painting soft stripes of light across the bed. She stirred slowly, blinking away the remnants of sleep. For a moment, she didn't quite remember where she was. The humming of air conditioning, the faint scent of coffee drifting from the hallway, the muted sounds of cars outside. All of it felt unfamiliar. Then it came rushing back. Disneyland, the lost wallet, the fireworks. Daniel. She sat up, pulling the covers around her as though to steady herself. The memory of the previous night lingered warmly, almost dreamlike. She reached for her phone on the bedside table and noticed a new message. It was from a number she had saved just hours ago. "Morning. Hope you slept well. If you're free today, I'd be happy to show you a side of California beyond the park. Coffee first." Emily smiled, her heart skipping a beat. She typed back quickly, her fingers trembling slightly from a mix of excitement and nerves. "Good morning. Coffee sounds perfect. Just let me know where." By the time she had showered and dressed, the message came with details. A cafe just a short walk from her hotel, tucked away from the tourist crowds. She slipped her wallet carefully into her bag again, double-checked the zipper, and stepped out into the Californian morning. The air was already warm, carrying the faint scent of palm trees and distant traffic. The cafe was small, its windows lined with potted plants and a chalkboard outside announcing daily specials. Inside, the atmosphere was calm, filled with the low hum of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine. Daniel was already there, seated at a corner table, waving when he spotted her. He looked different without the Disneyland badge or uniform. More relaxed, more himself. "Hey," he said as she slid into the seat across from him. "How are you feeling after yesterday's adventure?" "Better," Emily admitted with a soft laugh. "Still a little embarrassed that I managed to drop my wallet on my first day. But it turned out okay. More than okay, I hope." Daniel teased lightly, then leaned forward. "What would you like?" "Coffee's on me." They ordered an iced latte for her, black coffee for him, and settled into conversation. At first, it was light-hearted. They spoke about the quirks of British and American expressions, about how Emily found Californian mornings brighter than she was used to, and how Daniel had never actually traveled outside the US despite working in a place filled with people from all over the world. But as the minutes stretched into hours, their words deepened. Emily found herself telling him about her father again, about the way grief sometimes came in waves when she least expected it. Daniel listened without interruption, his gaze steady, his expression open. In return, he spoke about his mother, about how he still sometimes felt her presence in small moments, like the smell of cinnamon rolls or a particular song on the radio. "It's strange," Emily murmured, stirring the ice in her drink. "We come all the way to Disneyland, thinking it's about escaping reality, but then somehow, it brings us right back to what we've lost, and maybe to what we've found." Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached across the table, his hand brushing hers briefly, gently. It wasn't forward or rushed, just a simple gesture of understanding. Emily's chest tightened, not with sadness this time, but with something that felt dangerously close to hope. After coffee, Daniel suggested a walk. They strolled through quiet streets lined with palm trees, the sun climbing higher, their shadows stretching side by side on the pavement. He pointed out small details: a mural on the side of a building, a bookstore he liked, the faint sound of a street musician playing guitar near the corner. "Most visitors never leave the park," he said, glancing at her. "But Anaheim has its own charm. It's not London, I know, but there are pockets of life here that feel just as real as the magic down the road." Emily nodded, her eyes catching on the mural's bright colors. "I like it. It feels authentic. A little less polished than Disneyland, but more human." By midday, they found themselves back near the park, where the crowds were beginning to swell again. Emily hesitated. "I don't want to take up all your time. You probably have work today?" "Not until tomorrow," Daniel said. "I switched shifts with a friend. Thought it might be nice to actually spend a day outside the gates." "Lucky me," Emily said, her voice tinged with shyness. They decided to visit downtown Disney, wandering through shops filled with souvenirs, trying on silly hats, laughing at overpriced toys. Emily bought a small keychain shaped like the castle. Deciding it would be her keepsake from the day, she almost lost everything, but ended up finding something else entirely. As afternoon turned to evening, Daniel suggested one more stop. He drove them out toward the coast, the city giving way to wider roads and the distant smell of salt. When they reached Huntington Beach, the horizon was already shifting into shades of orange and pink. The waves rolled steadily, surfers silhouetted against the fading light. Emily stood barefoot at the edge of the sand, the cool water lapping at her toes. She breathed in deeply, the ocean air sharp and alive. Daniel joined her, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the endless horizon. "It's funny," Emily said softly. "I came here to chase childhood memories. But this feels more real than any ride or parade." Daniel glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe because this isn't scripted. It's just us. No magic needed." The sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the waves. Emily felt a stillness settle over her, a kind of peace she hadn't expected to find on this trip. She turned slightly, her eyes meeting his. The world around them seemed to fade. The noise of the waves, the laughter of children playing nearby, the distant bark of a dog. And for a heartbeat, there was only the quiet pull between them. They didn't kiss, not yet. But the possibility hung in the air, fragile and unspoken. When the sun finally slipped below the horizon, they walked back to the car in comfortable silence. Daniel drove her to her hotel again, the city lights flickering past the windows. At the entrance, she turned to him, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. "Thank you," she said softly, "for today, for showing me more than I expected." "You're welcome," he replied, his smile gentle. "I meant what I said. I'm glad yesterday didn't ruin your trip. Maybe it even made it better." She nodded, her throat tight with unspoken words. Maybe it did. They exchanged a quiet goodnight, and Emily stepped into her hotel once again, her heart caught between the comfort of the day and the uncertainty of what it meant. She sat by the window long after, looking out at the faint glow of Disneyland in the distance. Tomorrow, she knew, she could return to the park, ride the attractions she hadn't yet tried, and take the photographs she promised her sister. But something told her that the story of this trip would no longer be about the rides or the shows. It would be about the unexpected way two lives had collided in the middle of a crowded park because of a lost wallet. And as she finally drifted to sleep, the thought of Daniel's smile and the warmth of his company followed her into her dreams. The next morning arrived with a brightness that filled Emily's hotel room, the California sun already high and unforgiving. She woke slowly, stretching her arms, the lingering echo of yesterday's beach walk still vivid in her mind. When she checked her phone, she saw a message waiting. "Good morning. Hope you're ready for round 2. Got any plans today?" Her lips curved into a smile. She typed back quickly, fingers dancing over the screen. "No big plans. Just wanted to explore the park a little more. But I wouldn't mind company if you're free." Daniel's reply came almost instantly. "Meet me at the entrance around 10. We'll make today memorable." Emily showered, dressed in a light summer dress, and carefully packed her small bag. This time, she checked her wallet 3 times before stepping out. The streets were already alive with families walking toward Disneyland, children clutching autograph books, parents juggling strollers and backpacks. She blended into the stream of visitors, her heart quickening at the thought of seeing Daniel again. He was waiting just outside the gates, wearing a casual t-shirt and jeans, sunglasses perched on his nose. When he spotted her, he lifted a hand in greeting, his smile wide and genuine. "Ready for another adventure?" he asked. "Always," Emily said, feeling a lightness in her chest. They started the day at Adventureland, wandering through the lush greenery and boarding the Jungle Cruise. The boat rocked gently as the skipper cracked corny jokes, and Emily found herself laughing harder than she expected. Daniel leaned closer, whispering his own commentary, and she had to cover her mouth to keep from laughing out loud. From there, they moved to Fantasyland, riding the carousel. Then It's a Small World. The animatronic dolls sang their endlessly looping tune, and Emily hummed along, her eyes shining. She caught Daniel watching her, not the ride, and felt a warmth rise in her cheeks. By midday, they stopped for lunch at a shaded patio cafe. The smell of roasted turkey legs and sweet churros hung in the air. Emily took a sip of her lemonade, letting the coldness refresh her. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I didn't expect this trip to turn out like this. I thought I'd spend the whole time alone, ticking off rides, maybe buying a few souvenirs for my sister. But now you've got a tour guide who won't stop talking," Daniel teased. She shook her head, smiling. "But now I've got someone to share it with. And that makes it different. Better." He held her gaze for a moment, his expression softer than before. "I'm glad you feel that way, because I do too." The afternoon blurred into a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds. They screamed together on Space Mountain, their laughter mingling with the rush of the ride. They cooled off on Splash Mountain, water soaking their clothes, leaving them breathless with giggles. They walked hand in hand at times, though neither mentioned it, as though it had become natural. When evening fell, Daniel suggested something different. "There's a place inside the park that most people overlook. Come on." He led her to a quiet corner near New Orleans Square, where a jazz band played softly in the distance. They found a bench beneath a tree strung with fairy lights. The sounds of the crowd felt far away here, muted by the music and the rustling leaves. "This was my mum's favorite spot," Daniel said quietly. "She used to bring me here when I was a kid. Said the world felt slower here, more peaceful." Emily touched his arm gently. "She must have been a wonderful woman." "She was," he said, a shadow of sadness flickering in his eyes. "I think she'd have liked you." The words hung between them, tender and fragile. Emily's heart tightened, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. She wanted to say something, to tell him how much it meant, but all she could do was squeeze his hand. The fireworks began again that night, colors exploding above the castle. But this time, Emily barely watched. Her focus was on Daniel, on the way his eyes reflected the light, on the quiet smile tugging at his lips. And when the finale roared across the sky, their shoulders brushed, and then their hands found each other's, fingers intertwining with a certainty that needed no words. After the show, they lingered by the wishing well once more. Emily dropped another coin, her wish unspoken but clear in her heart. Daniel glanced at her curiously. "Another wish? Maybe," she said softly. "Can I ask what for?" She shook her head with a small smile. "If I tell you, it won't come true." He laughed gently, accepting her mystery. But when their eyes met, she suspected he already knew. The following days passed like something out of a dream. They spent one afternoon driving along the Pacific Coast Highway, the ocean glittering to their left, cliffs rising to their right. They stopped at small diners, sampled fish tacos, and took photos against the backdrop of crashing waves. Another day, they returned to Disneyland, riding the attractions they had missed, sharing cotton candy as the afternoon sun dipped low. Everywhere they went, Emily felt her heart opening, her laughter freer, her steps lighter. She realized how long it had been since she'd felt this alive, since she had allowed herself to simply enjoy the presence of another person without fear of loss. But as the end of her trip drew closer, a quiet heaviness settled over her. Each evening, as she returned to her hotel, she thought about the inevitable flight back to Manchester. She thought about her students, her sister, her home, and she thought about Daniel, standing in the warm California night, waving her good night with that smile that had become so dear. On her second-to-last night, they sat on a bench outside the park, the distant music fading as the crowds thinned. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. Emily leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I don't want this to end," she whispered. Daniel was quiet for a long moment before replying. "It doesn't have to. Not really. We live in a world where a flight isn't impossible, where messages cross oceans in seconds. It won't be the same, I know, but maybe it doesn't have to be goodbye." She lifted her head to look at him. "Do you really think we could?" "I think," he said gently, "that sometimes life gives you something unexpected, and you have to decide whether it's worth holding on to, no matter the distance." Tears pricked at her eyes, not of sadness, but of something deeper, a mixture of gratitude and fear and hope. She reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "Then let's not let it go," she whispered. They sat there in silence, the lights of Disneyland glowing faintly behind them, the future uncertain but alive with possibility. For Emily, the lost wallet had been the beginning of something she could never have predicted. What she had nearly lost in panic, she had gained in connection. And as the final day approached, she knew this trip would stay with her forever. Not just as a memory of rides and parades, but as the story of how two paths crossed in the most unexpected of places. The final morning of Emily's trip arrived with a heaviness that no sunlight could lift. She woke early in her hotel room, the soft buzz of the alarm pulling her into the reality she had been dreading. The suitcase stood by the door, neatly packed the night before. Every fold of clothing, every carefully placed souvenir, carried the weight of inevitability. She lingered by the window, pulling the curtains slightly aside to watch the Californian sky brighten. The palm trees swayed gently, the hum of traffic already starting below. She had loved these mornings, with their sense of promise and adventure. But today, the air felt different, still sweet, yet bittersweet. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. A message appeared. "I'm outside. Thought we could have breakfast before you leave." Emily's heart tightened. She grabbed her bag, checked her passport again, and stepped out. Daniel was waiting by his car, leaning against the door with that familiar, easy smile. But even in his smile, she could see the shadow of the same weight pressing on her chest. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning." They drove in silence for a while, the city passing by in hazy golden light. He took her to a small cafe not far from the airport, a quiet place with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh pastries. They ordered coffee and pancakes, but neither seemed interested in the food. "So," Daniel began, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly, "how are you feeling?" "Like I'm leaving something important behind," Emily admitted. His eyes softened. "Maybe you're not leaving it. Maybe you're just carrying it with you." She smiled faintly, though her throat ached. "You always know the right thing to say." "Not always," he said with a wry smile. "If I did, I'd know how to make this easier." They sat in silence for a long while, the clatter of dishes and quiet chatter of other customers filling the space between them. Finally, Emily reached across the table, taking his hand. "Promise me this isn't the end." "It's not," he said firmly, squeezing her hand. "I'll call you. Every day if you want. We'll find a way." When it was time, Daniel drove her to the airport. The drive felt both too short and unbearably long. At the departure gate, they stood facing each other, surrounded by the noise of announcements and rolling suitcases, yet wrapped in their own fragile bubble. "I wish I could stay longer," she whispered. "I wish you could too," he said. There was nothing left to say, only the press of their lips in a kiss that was tender and lingering, filled with the weight of everything unspoken. When she finally pulled away, her eyes brimmed with tears. "I'll see you soon," she said. "You will," he promised. And then she turned, walking toward security, forcing herself not to look back. The flight to Manchester felt endless. Emily sat by the window, staring at the clouds, her thoughts a restless tangle. She replayed their moments, the rides, the laughter, the fireworks, the quiet conversations in hidden corners of the park. It all felt like a dream, too vivid to be forgotten, too fragile to be real. Back in England, life quickly resumed its rhythm. The familiar drizzle of rain, the gray streets, the hum of everyday life welcomed her back with a familiarity that felt both comforting and suffocating. She returned to her classroom, to the chatter of her students, to the routine of lesson plans and grading papers. But Daniel was never far. True to his word, he called that very night. "How was the flight?" he asked, his voice crackling slightly through the line. "Long," she said, smiling despite her exhaustion. "But hearing you now makes it feel shorter." And so began a new chapter. Days turned into weeks, and their conversations became a lifeline. They texted throughout the day, shared photos of their worlds, fell asleep to the sound of each other's voices on the phone. Emily found herself laughing at messages during staff meetings, her heart fluttering whenever his name lit up her screen. But distance has a way of testing even the strongest connections. There were nights when the time difference weighed heavily, when Daniel was finishing work just as Emily was going to bed. Sometimes calls were missed, sometimes replies delayed. A message would be left unanswered for hours, and though she knew it was because of schedules, the silence gnawed at her. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day at school, Emily sat on her sofa, staring at her phone. It was past midnight in California, and she hadn't heard from Daniel all day. Her chest tightened with a mix of longing and doubt. When the phone finally rang, she answered quickly. "Hi." Daniel's voice came through, warm but tired. "Hi," she said softly. "Sorry, work was insane today. I barely had time to breathe." "I understand," she said, though her voice wavered. He noticed. "Emily, talk to me. What's wrong?" She hesitated, then sighed. "It's just sometimes it feels so hard, like we're in two different worlds. I see couples walking together in the park, sitting in cafes, and I wonder, how long can we do this? How long can we stretch this invisible thread between us?" There was silence on the other end for a moment before Daniel spoke. "I wonder the same thing, but then I remember how it felt to meet you, how it felt to sit with you under the fireworks, or to hear you laugh on the rides. And I know I'd rather hold on to that, even across an ocean, than let it go." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not from sadness. "I feel the same," she whispered. The months rolled on. They celebrated Emily's birthday over video call. Daniel surprising her by arranging for a bouquet of flowers to be delivered to her flat. On Christmas, she mailed him a sweater she had picked carefully, while he sent her a pendant shaped like a star, telling her it reminded him of the night sky over Disneyland. And yet, the ache of distance never fully faded. There were moments of doubt, moments of longing so sharp it felt like a physical wound. Friends asked questions, some supportive, some skeptical. "Do you really think this will work?" they asked. Emily never had a perfect answer, only a quiet certainty in her heart. One evening in early spring, as Emily was leaving her classroom, her phone buzzed with a message. "Check your front door in an hour." Puzzled, she hurried home, and when she opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. Daniel was standing there, suitcase at his side, grinning. "Surprise," he said. For a moment, she couldn't move. Then she launched herself into his arms, laughter and tears mingling. The scent of him, the warmth of his embrace, the solidity of his presence, it all crashed over her like a wave. "You're really here," she whispered. "I told you I'd find a way," he murmured. The days that followed were like a dream. They walked through the cobbled streets of Manchester, visited the Peak District, cooked meals together in her small kitchen. Every moment felt precious, soaked in the awareness of how fleeting it might be. On the last evening before his flight back, they sat on a hill overlooking the city, the lights twinkling below. "I don't want to leave again," Daniel admitted. "Then don't," Emily said, half joking, half pleading. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Maybe one day I won't." And as they kissed beneath the starlit sky, Emily realized that love was not always about certainty or proximity. Sometimes it was about choosing, again and again, to hold on, no matter the distance. When Daniel returned to California after that surprise visit, Emily felt as though part of her chest had been ripped open. She tried to keep her days busy with work, outings with friends, and late-night reading, but there was always a quiet emptiness. The sofa seemed larger, her evenings seemed longer, and the sound of rain on her windows no longer felt comforting. At first, their calls and messages were just as strong as before, filled with excitement and plans. They spoke about trips they wanted to take together, about visiting Disneyland Paris someday, about perhaps even spending Christmas in America. But with every conversation, beneath the laughter and affection, a quiet question lingered. How long could they sustain this? Daniel's work at Disneyland kept him busy, often pulling him into long shifts. Emily's responsibilities as a teacher grew heavier too, especially as exam season approached. Sometimes, the time difference felt like a cruel game. By the time Daniel was free, Emily was already half asleep. By the time Emily was ready to talk, Daniel was just starting his day. One evening, after a particularly draining parent-teacher conference, Emily lay on her bed staring at the ceiling. The phone lay by her side, silent. She had messaged Daniel hours ago, and still no reply. She told herself he was busy, but the silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Finally, at midnight, her phone buzzed. "Sorry, Em. Just finished work. Today was crazy." She typed quickly, her frustration slipping through her fingers. "You always say that. I feel like I'm talking to a shadow of you." There was no reply for several minutes, and then finally, "That's not fair. I'm trying. You know I am." She closed her eyes, guilt flooding her. He was right. He had always tried, but it didn't erase the ache. The next weekend, she met her friend Charlotte at a small cafe near the university. Charlotte was the kind of friend who never sugar-coated things. "You look exhausted," Charlotte said, sipping her latte. "And don't tell me it's just work. I know that face. It's him, isn't it?" Emily sighed, stirring her tea without drinking it. "I love him, Char. I really do. But sometimes it feels like loving him hurts more than it heals." Charlotte tilted her head. "So what are you going to do? Keep waiting forever? Or make a choice?" Emily didn't answer. The question sat heavy between them, echoing in her mind long after she left the cafe. Weeks passed, and spring slowly shifted into summer. Daniel suggested visiting again, this time for 2 weeks, and Emily's heart leapt. When he finally arrived, stepping off the train with his familiar grin, it felt as though the world had righted itself. They spent the days exploring, cooking, meeting her friends. For those 2 weeks, everything felt easy, real, solid. But as the end of his stay drew near, the shadow of goodbye crept in again. On their last night, they sat together on Emily's balcony, the lights of Manchester flickering in the distance. "I don't want to keep doing this," Emily whispered. Daniel turned to her, alarm flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I don't mean us. I mean this. The distance. The endless goodbyes. It's tearing me apart." He was quiet for a long time, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Finally, he said, "Then maybe it's time we stop living like this." Her heart raced. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he turned to face her fully, his expression firm, "that I've been looking into transferring. There's a program with Disneyland Paris. If I get it, I'd be only a short flight from you. We could see each other every month, maybe more." Emily stared at him, disbelief and hope colliding inside her. "You never told me. I didn't want to promise something I couldn't deliver. But I think I have a real chance. And if not Paris, then I'll find another way. Because I don't want a life where you're just a voice in my ear or a face on a screen." Her throat tightened. She leaned into him, resting her forehead against his. "You'd really do that? Leave California? Leave everything you've built?" "I'd do it," he said simply. "For us." The words stayed with her long after he left again. The goodbye was painful, but it carried a spark of something new, hope. As weeks turned into months, Daniel kept her updated. He applied for the transfer, endured interviews, waited anxiously for replies. Emily walked through her days with a quiet fire inside her, torn between excitement and fear. What if it worked? What if it didn't? One September afternoon, just as Emily was finishing class, her phone buzzed with a message. "Guess who's moving to Paris?" She gasped, her hands trembling as she typed back. "You got it." "I got it," came the reply, followed by a photo of Daniel grinning wildly, holding a letter. Tears sprang to her eyes. She excused herself quickly, stepping into the corridor, her heart thundering. She dialed his number, and when he picked up, his voice was thick with excitement. "I'm coming closer to you, Em. This is real." She pressed a hand to her mouth, laughing and crying at once. "I can't believe it." "Believe it. Next month, I'll be in Paris, and you'll only be a train ride away." The following weeks were a whirlwind. Daniel moved, sending Emily photos of his small flat in the suburbs of Paris. Emily booked her first ticket to visit him, her anticipation bubbling like champagne. When she finally arrived, stepping off the Eurostar into the busy station, she spotted him across the crowd. They ran to each other, the distance between them collapsing in an instant. Paris felt like a dream as they wandered hand in hand along the Seine, climbed the steps of Montmartre, and sat in tiny cafes sipping wine. But even then, challenges remained. Daniel's new job was demanding, and Emily's teaching responsibilities tied her to Manchester. They still couldn't see each other every day, but the difference was undeniable. Weekends together became a rhythm. The long stretches of silence shrank into shorter waits. The ache of distance dulled into something more bearable. One crisp winter evening, standing on a bridge overlooking the sparkling Eiffel Tower, Daniel took Emily's hand. "You know," he said quietly, "when you lost your wallet in Disneyland, I never imagined it would lead here." She smiled, leaning into him. "Neither did I. But I'm glad it did." He pulled something from his coat pocket, a small box. Her breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple ring. "Emily Turner," he said, his voice steady but his eyes shining. "I don't want to just close the distance. I want to end it. Will you marry me?" The city seemed to hold its breath. Emily's heart pounded as tears welled in her eyes. She nodded, words stuck in her throat, then finally whispered, "Yes." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, and as the Eiffel Tower sparkled behind them, they kissed, no longer bound by oceans, but bound by a promise. The weeks after Daniel's proposal unfolded in a haze of joy, disbelief, and the chaos of planning. Emily still caught herself glancing at the ring on her finger, as though it might vanish at any moment. Her colleagues at school noticed her constant smile, and soon the whispers spread. "Emily's engaged," they said in the staff room, their curiosity brimming. Her mother cried when Emily told her over tea one rainy Sunday afternoon. "I knew it," she said, clutching her daughter's hand. "I could see it in your eyes every time you spoke about him. You've been carrying this happiness for months." Still, happiness was not without its complications. The question of where to marry quickly surfaced. Emily's family was rooted in Manchester, her life and work tied to England. Daniel was now based in Paris, though his heart still carried the sunshine of California. They debated in long calls and quiet conversations during their weekends together. "Paris is romantic," Daniel argued one evening as they walked along the Seine. "It's where I proposed. It feels right." "But Manchester is home," Emily countered gently. "It's where my family is. It's where I grew up." They went back and forth, neither wanting to yield, both afraid of letting the other down. At last, they settled on a compromise. The ceremony would be in Manchester, where Emily's loved ones could easily gather. But they would host a small celebration later in Paris for Daniel's new colleagues and friends. The months leading up to the wedding were filled with phone calls, planning visits, endless lists of tasks. Emily felt pulled between lesson plans and floral arrangements, between her students' exams and seating charts. Daniel juggled his new responsibilities at Disneyland Paris with calls to vendors, hunting for suits, and planning their honeymoon. Through it all, they fought. Not often, but enough to remind them that love, even when strong, was not always simple. There were nights when Emily slammed her laptop shut in frustration after a disagreement over details. There were mornings when Daniel's tired voice on the phone made her wonder if he regretted leaving California. But after every fight came reconciliation, a late-night call, a tearful apology, a reminder of why they had chosen this path. Each argument left them a little stronger, a little more certain that they could weather storms together. The wedding day arrived on a cool spring morning in Manchester. The church was modest, filled with flowers that Emily's mother had helped arrange. Friends and family filled the pews, their voices hushed with anticipation. Emily stood at the entrance, her heart thundering beneath the lace of her dress. When the doors opened and she walked down the aisle, her eyes met Daniel's. For a moment, the room faded. There was only him, standing at the altar. His expression a mixture of awe and love so raw it made her breath catch. The vows were spoken through trembling voices, promises of love and fidelity echoing in the quiet of the church. Rings were exchanged, hands clasped tightly, and when the priest declared them husband and wife, the cheer that erupted shook the walls. Emily laughed through her tears as Daniel pulled her into a kiss, sealing the journey that had begun with a lost wallet in California. The reception was held in a small hall decorated with fairy lights and photographs of their time together. Friends toasted to their love, telling stories of Emily's determination and Daniel's warmth. Laughter rang out, glasses clinked, and for a night, the worries of the world seemed far away. Yet marriage, as they soon discovered, was not simply the continuation of romance. It was a new landscape, filled with joys and challenges. They settled into a small flat in Manchester after the wedding, deciding that Emily's job at the school was too rooted to leave immediately. Daniel commuted often to Paris, spending long weekends at home and weekdays abroad. At first, it felt manageable. They cherished every moment together, filling their evenings with dinners, walks, and long conversations. But the cracks appeared slowly. The exhaustion of travel wore on Daniel. The late nights of grading wore on Emily. Some evenings ended in silence, each too tired to speak. Other nights ended in arguments, about laundry, about bills, about the sheer fatigue of balancing two demanding lives. There were moments when Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if love alone was enough. But then she would roll over, see Daniel asleep beside her, his hand reaching unconsciously for hers, and the doubts would soften. One autumn evening, as rain pattered against the window, Daniel came home earlier than usual. Emily was cooking, the smell of roasted chicken filling the kitchen. He dropped his bag by the door, his expression serious. "I can't keep doing this," he said. Her heart froze. "Doing what?" "This," he gestured vaguely. "Living between two cities, between two lives. I feel like I'm always half here, half there. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to us." Emily set down the spoon, her hands trembling. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he took a deep breath, "that I want to move here, permanently. Disneyland Paris is wonderful, but it's not worth losing us. I'll find work here. I'll build something new with you." Tears filled her eyes, a mixture of relief and love. She crossed the room and embraced him, whispering, "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure," he said into her hair. The months that followed were not easy. Daniel resigned, said his goodbyes to colleagues, and moved fully into their Manchester flat. They adjusted, stumbled, and learned. He found work in event management, his skills from Disneyland translating well. Emily continued teaching, her days filled with children's laughter and the chaos of classrooms. Slowly, a rhythm formed. They cooked together, hosted small dinners for friends, spent weekends exploring the countryside. They laughed, they argued, they made up. Life was imperfect, but it was shared. On their first anniversary, they returned to Paris for a short trip. Standing once more beneath the Eiffel Tower, Emily slipped her hand into Daniel's. "Do you ever think about that day in Disneyland?" she asked softly. "All the time," he said with a smile. "If you hadn't lost your wallet, we might never have met." She laughed. "Imagine that. One small mistake, and it changed everything." He kissed her temple. It didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like fate, as the tower sparkled above them. Emily realized that love was not about perfection or grand gestures. It was about choices made day after day. The choice to stay, to fight, to forgive. The choice to believe that a lost wallet could lead to a found life. And in that moment, surrounded by the hum of Parisian night, she knew she would keep making that choice again and again for as long as she lived. As the sun began to set over Disneyland, the park lights flickered on, bathing Main Street in a soft golden glow. Emily stood near the exit gate, her wallet finally secure in her hand, but more importantly, her heart steady with a newfound calm. She looked around at the crowd, families laughing, children clutching souvenirs, and couples taking slow steps as if reluctant to leave the magic behind. She realized that the wallet was never the true story. What mattered was the journey it had led her on. The fear, the uncertainty, the kindness of strangers, and the quiet strength within herself that she hadn't known was there. She whispered to herself, almost like a promise, "Sometimes the smallest things remind us of the biggest truths." With that, Emily walked toward the glowing arch of the park's exit, the sounds of laughter and music following her into the California evening. The wallet was safe, but more than that, she carried with her an experience that she knew she would never forget. And as the fireworks began to light up the sky behind her, she smiled, knowing the story wasn't ending. It was only changing into the next chapter of her life.